The atmosphere in the general's command tent was tense. The 15 soldiers standing within it with weapons drawn, looking at each other with worried glances, hoping that they wouldn't receive an order that promised a permanent and violent end to their military careers. In the center of the circle of worried soldiers was Arvandus, their commanding officer, and the one who had ordered them to wait in his tent for a coming guest. The guest being a large ogre who had just arrived. At first glance, Vosklad's strong hand looked like your typical ogre. Taller than a human, his main bulk was taken by a massive gut which made him look more like a walking top than a humanoid. At first glance, he might even be considered comical, if you didn't look at his mouth full of jagged teeth or his arms that could crush a soldier with ease. However, despite his looks, Vosklad didn't act like most ogres. The best description one could give him was pleasant. A jovial personality that was quick to make clever jokes and made even the humans around him feel comfortable. That combined with multicolored leggings, a ruffled shirt, and a large tricorn hat made him out to be more of a jester than a monster. A jester whose smile never left his face as he entered and noticed a soldier standing at the ready.
Well, well,
Vosklad said, his gruff voice carrying a pleasant tone.
What's all this, General? Expecting a little war in your tent? If I didn't know any better, I'd think you were expecting someone to cause trouble.
I assure you, Mr. Stronghand, Arvandus said politely, his body at ease and his voice showing none of the tension he felt. They are simply there in case of disagreements. Vosklad turned his head slightly, a look of amusement on his face, before saying,
And may I ask, what sort of disagreements would there be?
The general stood silent for a few seconds. Despite the number of soldiers around him, he did feel some trepidation about uttering the next few words. But ultimately, he continued, It concerns your payment, good sir. Arvandus knew that Vosklad wasn't one of the monster species of ogres known as the Beast Claw Raiders that carry with them an unnatural cold. But still, at the utterance of those words, Arvandus could practically feel the temperature of the room sink, as if the very heat in the air was trying to escape what was going to happen.
Oh?
Vosklad said coldly, his right eyebrow rising slowly, his smile now gone. Well, Mr. Stronghand, Arvandus continued, as if not noticing Vosklad's change in demeanor, you know as well as I do that the war between our cities and the forces of our enemies has not gone according to plan. What was supposed to be a quick war to gather resources that rightfully belong to us has led to quite the slog. So much so that we had to cut certain expenses, such as your mercenary unit.
It happens,
Vosklad replied calmly, before waiting for Arvandus to continue. Now normally, we would pay you for the last month's worth of work, especially since you have helped us hold the line here. However, the leaders of the city have decided that they will cut off your funding entirely, believing your skills have been inadequate to the task. I tried to explain otherwise, but they are rather obstinate. I hope you understand. Vosklad stood frozen, his face unreadable, the lack of reaction causing Arvandus to stumble over his next few words. Now, you may be tempted to retaliate, but I'll have you know I have sent an order for a full complement of my soldiers to encircle your men in case of trouble. More than enough to take even their formidable might. At those words, every soldier gripped their swords tighter and watched the ogre for any sign of violence, ready to slice apart the ogre with everything they had. Vosklad simply stood silent for a full 10 seconds, before he started to laugh, slapping his belly and cracking a huge smile.
General, I understand. Can't trust those leaders in their cities, thinking more about numbers and winning wars. I can easily explain it to my men and move out without trouble.
Arvandus exhaled, releasing a breath he didn't know he was holding, already thinking of the letter he was planning to write to the city council.
However, I do have one request,
Vosklad said suddenly, his hand reaching inside a pouch at his side. Immediately, the soldiers tightened their grips on their blades, and Arvandus slowly moved his hand to the handle of his own sheathed sword. Removing a piece of paper from the pouch, Vosklad showed it to Arvandus.
Do you mind reading this for me?
The soldiers around Arvandus immediately relaxed, a few looking at each other with knowing smiles. The stupidity of ogres, a well-known bit of common knowledge. Arvandus smiled. Of course, it's the least I could do. Glancing at the sheet, Arvandus's mood immediately went from relief to shock. The piece of paper were orders to move the main bulk of his forces from the front line to the city, leaving himself and a small number of soldiers in his section to hold the line. But it wasn't just the order that had him stunned, but who had written it. "This is my handwriting," Brandis said, looking at Vosklad.
Not quite, good sir,
Vosklad said simply.
As you can see, your A's in that paper don't have your signature flair. It was a first draft after all. The final work I wrote corrected that flaw. I had one of my men convince one of your trusted messengers to give those orders to your troops. We Ogres don't have much use for gold, you see. But it is useful when given to certain soldiers in your army who are tired of fighting in an exhaustive and costly war. I'll admit, I don't get it. I am personally having the time of my life. But I've always found humans strange.
As Brandis' shock slowly lessened, the implication of Vosklad's words made themselves clear. Before he could scream orders, he heard the sound of combat nearby. A second later, a frightened soldier rushed in. Gasping for breath, he blurted, "Sir! The ogres! They're attacking! They're killing everyone!" Not looking away from the general, Vosklad simply said,
"The general stays. The rest of you run if you don't want my men to teach you why we're called Maneaters."
There was a momentary pause, as duty clashed with survival, before most of the soldiers fled the tent, leaving only 2 willing to risk an attack on the possibly distracted Ogre. They didn't even get a chance to strike. One soldier Vosklad simply hit with the back of his hand, breaking that poor man's neck. With the other hand, he pulled out a club composed of more than a dozen metal rods melted together. In one swift movement, he raised the weapon above his head and swung down, striking the unfortunate second soldier, hitting her shoulder and repositioning it to her waist, leaving behind a crumpled mass of flesh. The soldier's dead, Vosklad turned back to the general.
"Now, General, I understand your predicament,"
Vosklad said with sympathy in his voice.
"I really do. But you have to understand mine. If I leave here without my payment, my reputation is shot. Other armies would think of doing something similar and I can't have that. Sadly, even though it's not your fault, I will need to make an example of you. But don't worry,"
Vosklad continued, his tone lightening.
"I'm not one of my gutbuster kin. I'm a civilized sort. I'll make sure to kill you before I start eating you."
With a smile on his face, Vosklad slowly raised his weapon, allowing Brandis a moment to curse every member of his city's council, hoping that one day, each one of those greedy fools find themselves inside an ogre's gullet. Within the realms, the ogres are known for its ravenous tribes that ravage the countryside, looking for delectable meats or shiny trinkets. A horde of rotund monsters who leave devastation in its wake. Occasionally, however, an ogre will choose to strike out on its own. Their reasons are many. Some do it because they had a vision from Gorka Morka. Others because they want to see the wider world. And others because they simply grew bored. Whatever their reasons, they all tend towards the same profession. That of a mercenary. Their large size and urge for violence making them ideal soldiers, as well as their relatively cheap costs. Most ogres preferring hunks of meat and shiny trinkets over gold. This preference has made many a commander see the ogres as simple-minded. And although many an ogre could be considered less than cunning, many others are much more intelligent than they appear. Any attempts to cheat or trick them causing a rather violent reaction on the part of the ogre. To be a man-eater is to be an ogre of adventure. To fight your enemies across the realms for the right price and the right meal. Hey guys, this is Arvandus and I hope you enjoyed this video about the man-eaters. A fun bunch of guys who just like to go out, have adventures, and eat people. If you liked it, please like, subscribe, and comment. And if you really liked it, please consider giving to my Patreon. With the extra money, it gives me the time I need to really work on these stories I love to write. Anyway, thanks for listening and see you next time.